Well, joining us to discuss the latest developments around NATO, we're joined in studio by Professor Anthony van Niekerk from the Wits School of Governance. Good afternoon, Professor, and thank you once again for your time on the PM News Desk.
Sure, pleasure.
Look, this summit being touted as the most significant ever since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Could it be the unprecedented number of global security crises that we're seeing in the world right now? Would this play a factor?
In determining that this is the biggest ever summit? Yes, indeed. It's a bit of an overblown concept, though. Not all of the security threats that we see in the world threatens the Americans or the people from Europe.
Yes.
But they do feel that they are the target of many of these things. I think it's a misconception to think that the war of ISIS is against the Americans. It isn't. It's about something else. It's about the Middle East and the political relations, power relations in the Middle East. Nevertheless, the Americans and the Europeans together forming NATO, which is this military alliance, which is arguably the strongest military alliance in the world. And if it decides that it needs to take action against perceived threats, then we have to sit up and listen. Then it's important. So yes, it's an important summit. It's very significant because the tension between Russia
And the Ukraine.
Well, Russia under Putin and the Europeans and the Americans is very significant. We saw that kind of tension in the Cold War era, where two very strong blocs stood up against each other. The Ukraine is a victim in this power struggle that's emerging between the Russians and the Americans and the European, or the West on the one hand and on the other hand. So Ukraine is really a pawn that's being moved around on the chessboard. Whether the Europeans and the Americans or the Russians want peace now in Ukraine, I don't know. I doubt that. And that's a cynical thing to say, isn't it?
Yes.
But the Americans and the Russians pour weapons into the Ukraine. And what does that tell you?
Will the Kremlin be threatened or intimidated at all by this new rapid response team?
My fear is that they'll be angered.
Yes.
So Putin is like a bee stinging the man. Putin's very, if you look at his personality, his style, his psychological makeup, proud man, strong Kremlin boss, all of that security background, trying to recover Russia as its former glory. He's not going to take this lightly. In fact, this is not a new idea to put up a rapid reaction force. In fact, we as Africans have the same idea.
Yes.
How do we tackle Somalia or the CAR or Ebola? We need a rapid reaction force. Whether Europeans will be able to set this up and position 4,500 troops somewhere in Europe on the borders with Russia is another question. It's very expensive. And what will Putin's reaction be? I think he will react very angrily to this. It's an escalation of the tension. It's not a de-escalation.
All right, the last time the UK hosted the NATO summit, Margaret Thatcher was still Prime Minister. The Cold War had just come to an end. And there were questions around the relevance of the alliance at that time. Is it a question that still pertains now? What is the point to NATO?
The point to NATO is that it's the military muscle or arm of the world's strongest superpower, which is the Americans. Whether it's relevant for the rest of us, I doubt very much. One would rather see, imagine, it's an alliance of 28 states, and they pour millions and billions into weaponry and into defense measures. Imagine if you can turn this around and make it a development arm of the world's rich countries. Then it'll be relevant to all of us. It is a reaction or a reactionary type of alliance. It responds to perceived crises. My fear is, I'm quite cynical about this. My fear is that it will become involved in the Middle East yet again. Remember, Obama has just pulled out of Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yes.
At cost to himself, his presidency, a large number of American soldiers. NATO, in this very aggressive talk of Rasmussen, who's the chief of NATO, might want to go back in to these conflict areas again. And I think that is bad news.
Well, Obama is also calling for a core coalition force to help combat ISIS in the Mideast. Will he enjoy a fair amount of support from the NATO alliance or not?
He's going to bully a couple of countries into participating, as the Americans have done in its foreign policy going into Afghanistan or Iraq. So if Obama calls you and you're the president of some country, you're not easily going to say no. So yes, he will find a coalition. But can I quickly say, I'm sure your time is up, that it's difficult to fight terrorism with conventional military hardware or a military approach. So the Americans must think twice about how they tackle this ISIS phenomenon, a terror group in the Middle East. Really, we need to think about ISIS in political and diplomatic terms and not military terms. ISIS wants the kind of war to come to them, and so it's not going to lead to anything good.
Thank you, Prof, for your time on the PM News Desk. That was Professor Anthony van Niekerk joining us from the Wits School of Governance.